White text over video of past events. Logo, Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. Professional Development Series presents Creative Engagement in an Aging Society. A wide stage with a black backdrop. At center is a screen with projections of captions and slides. At right is a black podium with gold text on front, MCA Chicago. Two people stand and address the audience.
Good afternoon. I'm the Director of Visitor Experience here at the MCA, and I'm with my partner and colleague, CCAC Steering Committee member Yolanda Kirsten, and we have the pleasure of introducing this month's offering from our friends at the Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. It is delightful to host our third event here at the MCA, with what I understand was planned to be the largest attendance of the year, although the rain might have caused a little trouble there, here on the MCA stage. I would love to say that being new to the museum world, this year I've had the joy of being introduced to the work of the CCAC through these monthly gatherings and the cultural leaders that bring their passion and expertise to our city and beyond. It has been a gift for me to be exposed to the many ways that we all work to create welcoming, accessible, and authentic experiences for those who visit our institutions, and I'm grateful to have met such a dedicated crew. I would like to say a special thank you to my colleague Yolanda, who has been a patient teacher and inspired partner in my own accessibility journey here at the MCA. I welcome you all today with open arms and hope once again you will be delighted and surprised by an offering from the CCAC. Today, I have the pleasure to first introduce Christina Gunther, founder and co-chair of the Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. Christina used to be the Community Programs Coordinator at the Elmhurst Historical Museum, and I understand she's just gotten a brand new job as the Programs Manager for the Chicago Architectural Foundation. Previously, she worked tirelessly on accessibility for visitors with disabilities at the Metropolitan Museum and Lincoln Center, and was a member of New York's Museum Access Consortium. That's the MAC Steering Committee. I understand that cultural accessibility became a passion of hers at a young age, visiting art museums with her brother who has Down syndrome. I will say that Yolanda shared with me a story about Christina. Christina's 4th grade class studied from the book, From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, a favorite of many 4th graders, which involves 2 kids running away from home and living in the Metropolitan Museum. Her 4th grade class then slept over at her own city's art museum in Wausau, Wisconsin. Although it might not have been the Met, she describes it as magical to live like characters in the book. I must say, for me, and I think Christina, and for many of you that are here today, the work you do, I hope, is a little bit like living storybook magic. And with that, I give you Christina Gunther.
Hi everybody, welcome today. As Pat so nicely introduced me, I'm from CCAC, Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium, and I'm curious, how many of you have been to CCAC programs before? Or you can clap, actually, if you want. So I think about like half of you. So welcome to those of you who it's your first time, and welcome back to our returning visitors. How many of you are from a museum? Raise your hand. So I think there's about 20 people with their hands raised. How many of you are from theaters? A smaller, maybe like 10 or so. How many are from other cultural spaces like zoo, arboretum? Great. We've got a handful, 5 or 6 other cultural orgs like that. Wonderful. How many of you are students? Awesome. We've got a great showing of students, probably 10, 15 students raising their hands. And how many of you are from nursing homes, assisted living, or work with seniors in some way? Great, so we have about 5 or 6 people who raised their hands. So as you can see, we've got a really diverse group here today, and we're really excited to join forces and to be talking about aging in cultural spaces and how we can do better. A few notes about housekeeping before we go any further. Please silence your cell phones, but we want you to keep your cell phones out because we'd love for you to tweet along all the great pearls of wisdom we're going to get from Anne in a little while. And the hashtag is Chicago Access. So please use that hashtag, and we definitely want you to keep tweeting during this program. Otherwise, you can stay off your phones. And Anne is going to talk for about an hour or so, and then we'll have an opportunity for a really ample Q&A session, so please save your questions to the end. And remember to wait for the microphone because today's session is being taped, and it also allows people who are using assistive listening devices to be able to hear the questions. I want to make sure also to thank MCA, Yolanda, and Pat for so generously welcoming us today. This is our third session we've had here at the MCA this year, which is so generous and so nice, so we appreciate that. Also want to make sure to thank Open Doors organization that made today possible. And is coming from Milwaukee. We were able to make that happen thanks to Open Doors. And I also want to thank AARP Illinois for sponsoring Kathy Raycan, our wonderful captioner, for today. Let's give them a round of applause. It's truly my pleasure to introduce Anne Basting, who is a PhD and an educator, scholar, and artist whose work focuses on the potential for the arts and humanities to improve our quality of life as communities and individuals. For 20 years, Basting has developed and researched methods for embedding the arts into long-term care with a focus on people with cognitive disabilities like dementia. She founded and directs the award-winning Time Slips Creative Storytelling, which replaces the pressure to remember with the freedom of imagination for people with memory loss. I first heard Anne speak about 8 years ago at an event at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and I remember having goosebumps while she was talking. I remember talking to my mom afterwards and telling her about how inspiring I found her talk to be. For many reasons, personal and also professional. I have 2 grandparents living with dementia at the time, and so it meant a lot to me in many ways. So I'm so happy that we're able to bring Anne here today. And my distinct hope is that this will propel conversations in Chicago about how we, as cultural organizations, can respond and adapt to our already existing audience who's just getting older and how we can better welcome them. So please join me in giving a really warm Chicago welcome to Anne Basting.
About the sweetest thing ever. Thank you to Christina, and I'm glad she did such a thorough job of thanking everyone, and I just want to reiterate that and thank her and the organization for bringing me down today and for hosting this lovely museum. I love taking the train down from Milwaukee. It's so sophisticated, it has Wi-Fi, it's very peaceful, and you come in and I strolled right on over here and enjoyed the art museum for a little bit this morning, so it's a nice, quiet change of pace. I strongly encourage you to try taking it in the other direction and come on up and visit us up in Milwaukee. So today, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of the work that I do, and also sort of take you on a journey of how I see the world, this world sort of changing and evolving. I've been working in this space for about 20 years now, aging myself, and it's been fascinating to watch it grow into consciousness, and I see some really interesting things happening, which I hope you'll find as interesting as well. To start out with, though, I'd like us to sort of play for a minute, if you don't mind. We have an image up here that bear with me and just sort of let me know what you see and think, and shout it out, and we're going to build a story together. So what do you see? A man walking. What else?
Butterfly man.
Butterfly man. What else? Butterfly man walking. Where do you want to say this takes place?
In the city.
In the city? Do you want to name the city? Chicago. We have a man walking, butterfly man walking in a city that happens to be Chicago. Do you want to give it a time that it takes place in?
Late afternoon.
Late afternoon. What, do you want to give it a year? What do you think? Any year you want.
1950s.
1990s or 1950s? So we have Chicago in either the 1950s or the 1990s. We have a gentleman walking. He's the butterfly man. Do you want to give him a name?
Albert.
Albert. Do we like Albert? Do you want to add any others? Albert. We have Albert. What sounds do you hear in the story?
Car horns.
Car horns? Anybody want to dare to make that sound? I asked you to play. You can play big or you can play small. All right, we have car horns. Any other sounds? Yeah. Sorry?
The sound of his crutch.
The sound of his
Clicking on
crutch.
what's that sound? It clicks.
It clicks. The sound of a clicking of his crutch on the sidewalk. Is that? And then you had a hand up?
I was going to say the same thing. I'll demonstrate the sound.
Thank you for playing. So we are in Chicago in the 50s or the 90s. We have Albert. Albert is the butterfly man. We hear the sounds of car horns and the sounds of, Carrie, can you make that lovely noise again? Of the crutch hitting the sidewalk. Where is, oh, and it's also late afternoon, sorry. Where is Albert going?
Grocery store.
He's going to the grocery store. What is he going to do there?
Get some ice cream.
He's getting ice cream. You know the next question.
And robbing.
Oh, he's going to rob it. He's going to steal the ice cream. What flavor ice cream?
Chubby Hubby.
Chubby. So that begs the next question, which is he, what about relationships? Does he have relationships?
No.
Is there anyone else in the picture? Sorry?
He's alone.
Sorry?
He's all alone.
He's all alone. Okay. Tell me about where he just came from. You can't see any of that in the picture, by the way. Just
He came from a card game.
he came from a card game. What kind of a card game?
Poker.
A poker game. How did he do?
Poorly.
Poorly. Is that why he has to rob the grocery store? All right. So what do you want to say happens next?
Flies away.
He flies away. All right. Let me try to retell this to you. Usually I write all this down, and I'm not, so you guys can fill in if I miss anything. We are in Chicago in either the 1950s or 90s. This is Albert. Albert is alone. He just came from a poker game where he did not do very well. He is on his way to a grocery store where he's going to get some Chubby Hubby ice cream and not pay for it. We hear the sound of car horns, and we hear the sound of his crutch hitting the sidewalk. And what did we say happens next?
Flies away.
He flies. Oh, he's the butterfly man, and he flies away. Yay! Give me that is improvisational storytelling that can take the shape of almost anything. We could have done that only in gesture. We could have done it as a poem. We could do it as role play. We can do it in this story, which is the very basis of all the work that I do, improvisational storytelling. I want to share with you, see if I can pull this up here, another story about this same image. It is 1917. This man is a French First World War veteran who was shot in the back. His name is Harry. He is 27. He has a dancing cane for doing the cha-cha. He has no family but a lot of friends. He is outside in France. He's going to a local cafe for a glass of wine. He is focused on contemplating his life. There is a giant butterfly behind him. He loves it. He's not afraid. It signifies peace. He's hoping to meet someone new, a woman perhaps. When they meet, they'll talk about spring and new beginnings. He's trying to forget what he experienced in the war. After that, maybe he'll get laid. She'll get married, but not to him, to someone she already knew, who bakes good baguettes. That was told by a group of people with dementia in an Australian care community. I like to share those stories after we do one ourselves, because I always find it a little breathtaking the freedom of imagination, and the power of the observations. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, I'm more inspired, no offense, by the stories that come out of the groups of people with dementia. So here's a question for you. When do people stop growing? At what age do your programs end? And to follow that up, and it's really just a thought piece, when do you plan to stop growing and learning? I think in the 20 years of work that I've done with people with dementia, it's become really clear to me that the answer is never. You never stop growing and learning, even in the farthest reaches. That there's always an opportunity to go from where you are to a new place of some form of expression, some sort of engagement with the world. So really the challenge becomes for cultural institutions, how can we make sure our programs are reaching people all the way through their lives, regardless of ability or disability that they're dealing with. So Chicago is addressing this. There is an Age-Friendly Community 2012 plan that was enacted. These things take long, careful processes. It's through the World Health Organization categorization of age-friendly communities. Who here knows about that initiative? Just a couple, just a handful of folks. So from that report, 2.8 million people in the city, 10.3% are currently over 65, according to that report, which is due to increase to 18% in 2030. So that's a significant jump that's on par with the rest of the country. So the image here is the old classic movie theater of, oh no, Godzilla's coming. And usually what those figures mean to communities is that there's a giant tsunami of stress on the system, of costs coming, that somehow we're going to go bankrupt from all the service costs. We're going to have massive social isolation and loneliness problems, and probably for hipster cities, a dramatic decrease in hipness. But what it really means is a puzzle. How can we adjust our cities from the fantasy that we've read about individualism, consumerism, isolation in the cul-de-sac in the suburbs? How can we shift that model, which clearly will not work in this situation, toward connectedness, a village approach, age-integrated neighborhoods, identifying the gifts and strengths of older people and people with disabilities, and tapping them. Strength and asset-based approaches to how the luxury of living longer is reshaping our cities, and how cultural institutions are part of that enormous and exciting change. So what does age-friendly community mean? And here there's this drawing that the age-friendly cities have, which is like a little daisy, and all these different pieces are on the different petals. So social participation, respect and social inclusion, civic participation and employment, community support and health services, communication and information, outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation, and housing. And the things I have on the right side here are the things that the Chicago report actually put up as their top concerns that they heard from all the neighborhood listening sessions that they had. So those were caregiver support, fall reduction, pedestrian street safety, which is one of my favorites, accessible public buildings, age-friendly buildings, transportation, housing, all of these different things, all the way down, information and services and assets, leadership and volunteer work and opportunities. Now, one thing you notice is missing off of there, social participation to them. They break down into senior centers, neighborhood clubs, and churches. Where are you? That was one of the most interesting things to me in reading this report. And the Age-Friendly Community Initiative, actually, I find this as a general fault. Cultural institutions somehow are in there in accessible buildings, maybe, but not necessarily part of the fabric of social participation. And I think it's a real opportunity for these networks to come together around that issue. The other thing that the Age-Friendly Community Initiative forgot, which is my horrible pun, is dementia-friendly communities. And let me just take a moment and say the language is evolving as I speak. Between now and the end of my talk, there will be a new term because there is unease with friendliness of community toward people with dementia. Some of the language is shifting towards dementia-capable communities. And it really is just about universal design. Age-friendly communities are really about universal design for people at every stage of their lives. Whether they have abilities or disabilities, and cognitive disabilities is just part of that. But there's a long tradition and history of uneasiness about dementia that follows us. It's a fear and a stigma that follows us from the structural level of organizations. Say, who here, again, I didn't get to see the hands, but if you're from a care community, you know about the Grand Canyon that exists between independent living and the skilled nursing. There is such a tremendous fear that somehow, I think Carrie, my good friend, referred to it as, and I think it's a friend of yours who's termed it as the disability gulag, which is, you really, there's a stigma about crossing that threshold. And so I talk about it as the Grand Canyon between independent and assisted or nursing home. And that follows us into our daily lives. The stats are that we delay diagnosis of dementia because there's multiple reasons, but one of the major ones is stigma. We don't want to go in because we're afraid of the label, and what that label will do is it's carried throughout our lives. We also, people with dementia, very commonly that stigma then cuts off family and friend connections so that social isolation sets in. And really, one of the things I am most adamant about is that we sometimes can't tell the difference between the symptoms of dementia and the iatrogenic effects of social isolation on people with those symptoms. We're making it worse by isolating people, even when they're living in a collective congregate care setting. Social isolation, we're human beings and we need each other. Social isolation makes us crazier. we get more cognitive disability when we're socially isolated. So these little unreadable cloud things around the little community picture that you see here for dementia-friendly communities really refer to all the different points of action you can take to make your community business-friendly. There's a lot of incredible work being done with restaurants about how to even organize and create your menu, about not putting signs, like cute little signs of chickens and roosters on your bathrooms, because a person with dementia will stare at that and really not understand the difference between the two things. Of having it both, if you want a cute sign, also put men and women on it, or make it gender neutral, which is even better, right? So there's all kinds of different things, supportive options in the community. A lot of them echo the age-friendly initiatives, but are much more dementia-specific. So what is the role of the arts sector in this, in becoming a dementia-capable community in an age-friendly city? I've divided this out into access and integration, creating meaningful and purposeful programming, and advocacy, which is amplifying the voices of the underheard or under-recognized in our community. And I'm going to go much more into detail there. Arts and cultural programming can focus on education and enjoyment for either the amateur who's doing it just because they love it, or for the professional who either has been a lifelong person in the arts or a serious newcomer who wants to develop very serious skills. And both can be done and should be done. There's also the category of making, which can be done at either level as well, for the love and enjoyment of it, or again, serious pursuit. In the making side, which is where my real love lies, is what I call creative engagement. It is not doing it for someone, it is inviting someone to make things with you. So it's an invitation to co-create with, not for, And it's modeling the act of expression and sharing in the act of expression together. I wanted to give you just an example. Just up, if you did take the train north, there's a really fascinating alliance called the Spark Alliance. Has anyone heard of the Spark Alliance? Christina, you can't raise your hand. So the Spark Alliance started, goodness me, I want to say maybe 8 years ago, when the Helen Bader Foundation, which is based out of Milwaukee, and it is really honestly the reason that we have a lot of these forward-thinking programs. They have Alzheimer's and the arts as some of their program areas and aging. They wanted to build a coalition of cultural institutions serving families with memory loss. So they took planning grant proposals from people, and then they shipped them all off to New York to go through the Museum of Modern Art program and the Met program, and at the time the Folk Arts Museum as well, in order to inspire them to create their own models for cultural programming in their own institutions. And they wanted to do it across the entire state, anyone serving Wisconsin residents, so there are some in Minnesota as well. These are tiny places. The Racine Cultural Heritage Museum has a staff of 1, right? So going to MoMA was a little bit overwhelming for like, how can that educational team of what, 20 versus the Racine Heritage Museum of 1, or the Woodson Museum in Wausau, or the Milwaukee Public Museum, the Madison Children's Museum. Such an incredible range of cultural institutions that were diving into this program to figure out how can we keep serving the people we've served their whole lives but now find themselves in memory loss. How can we make accessible programming? So I'm going to show you this video.
What Spark is amazing.
We love the program.
The Spark program is just a good release. Just because somebody has been categorized as having Alzheimer's doesn't mean that they're sitting in a bed or in a wheelchair parked in a hallway somewhere. It's all about staying actively engaged in your community and being a part of the community and continuing to be a part of the community.
Seeing, how powerful art can be and how people can just have this creative experience and really come alive.
There's been a number of participants when they arrived, there wasn't a lot of life in their eyes. And then at some moment in the conversation, you see their eyes light up. It's not a complicated program, really. We feel honored to be a part of their journey through dementia. I'm still interested in finding something, and that's never been like card games or bingo.
Trudy, you want to come up and put the bustle on? Turn around so everybody can see this. There you go. There it is. Now turn around towards me so everybody can see.
Oh.
Yeah. No.
You always want to keep the brain challenged no matter what age you are.
Who gets this next?
It can be more than a challenge, working with dementia.
Yes, I told you, use that bathroom.
We'll use it over there, that's okay.
Fine.
I'm going.
I'm gonna use it anyway.
No, come on.
Yes.
I can't do this alone anymore. I find that it's a lonely place to be. It's, you talk to people and their response is, I'll pray for you. And that's not what I want to hear.
Well, Parkinson is a disease that you get very simple. I feel that if you get it, you might sort of get there's a good chance that you're not going to make it to where you think you're going to live. Time will already tell with me, but I'll be here to the end. That's about what I feel.
You better be here today yet.
Yeah.
You better be here.
Yeah.
I think we're going to start heading over.
That's fine with me.
Many times stories have come up that the loved ones have never heard before.
And in that moment, you can just see that there's joy between them. You can feel the connection. Oh, it feels so good.
Yes.
Before Heidi was born, and we had a canoe.
Whenever your senses are stimulated, your brain is processing at a more rapid speed.
I have dementia, so I have to think. My brain has to get into the action.
Having experiences that are in the moment rather than, worrying about things from their past or, what happened that morning.
Yeah, I'm so happy. You don't know what this means to me.
Well, you don't know what it means to us. We have a really special treat. We have a really great exhibit this summer. All of our exhibits are about animals. And we actually have an artist sitting here today whose work we're going to look at. What we're going to do is we're going to do watercolor painting. We're going to create a tree with tape. We are going to do a nice sky and some grass to give our birds an environment. This is kind of a fun one.
Gloria, if you're looking out of this window, what would you like to see?
I'd like to see the angels and saints.
That's wonderful. I like that. I do like that. Mary, is there anything special you'd like to see when you look out that window?
Heaven.
Heaven.
You can make your tree as big as you want, as small as you want. You can focus more on the branches that you like.
Tom just is recovering from knee surgery, so we are so happy he was able to make it today. This is Tom.
So we were talking about a journey in space, and a lot of times when you go on a journey, it's nice to take notes or maybe make pictures of it. So we have some journals that we put together. Jim, what's your journey all about?
I think I'd probably do like every other human, grab a hold of something and hang on.
There you go.
If you're going to go whether you like it or not. When he got on that spaceship and took off and he's the only one there, he ran it, he named it, he guided it, he did everything to it. That had to be really something for a human being to have that feeling.
Even though I have 1,000 things I need to accomplish today, it's right at this moment, it's not important. I probably could sit here a little bit longer and just create something else. That's what I feel like I want to do. I feel very relaxed now.
I think they really enjoyed today. The lightheartedness and the laughter and the fun. I think it was kind of pretty what we were talking about. Well, make sure you say everything to come out for a day like this, where they might feel that, okay, now they're more equipped to handle, okay, let's try going here today. Let's try going to the Botanical Gardens today. Let's try going to these other places based on what they saw today.
It's like tingling goes through your body and your hands so that they're going to get numb. He's saying that if you put the brush down and you see what you did, it's tremendous. Everybody should have that feeling once.
When you create programming like this, in the trainings that we've done for museum staff, there's always a concern that I need to be completely trained in Alzheimer's and dementia to be able to do this. And one of the things that staff who've already implemented these programs will tell you is that, honestly, it's not that much different than the other programs that we run. There's a few things. When I did training for StoryCorps, the way that I trained their staff was to say, people without dementia are really frustrating to people with dementia. And your job is to figure out how not to be frustrating to people. How not to stop what you're doing when you're engaging people and in artwork or in a zoo or any of those things. When you encounter what you think is a symptom, that you don't stop, that you find a way to keep going and keep engaging and re-inviting the person into the moment. That is the real trick. There's some other tricks about how to make sure like doorways or pathways are limited or things like that, but they're minor in comparison to just you not stopping the invitation process to the moment. So the impact of these kind of programs, you get it from the family members who said, I just want to stay in this moment of co-creation and exploration just for a little bit longer. You get it from the people experiencing the memory loss and dementia themselves by talking about how incredibly empowering it is to have access to meaning making again. In the field of research, people are still trying to figure out what the mechanisms are, why it's working, and what's behind it. I have a quote here from Rollo May from 1975, which is, meeting and joining an other without judgment or expectation, something new can be born in body, mind, and spirit. By coming together in that moment of communion and co-creation is actually a moment of creation together. It's an extremely powerful moment to experience. People are heard and recognized. People have an opportunity, particularly people who are very, very medicalized. Older people are over-medicalized, and people with dementia are particularly almost completely overridden by the medical system. To break that open for like an hour, to be able just to have meaning-making opportunities come back to them where somehow they aren't being seen through a medical lens, but through just a human lens, where they're co-creating and expressing, is incredibly powerful. They're being allowed to give of themselves rather than taking and taking and taking and being put in a passive medicalized situation. It's an opportunity for them to be known deeply, and that in the care community is what we strive for in excellent care, to know someone deeply. It allows people to experience the flow of time differently. That's they talk about as being in flow of creativity, and to communicate using symbols and senses, which is beyond rational language. Oftentimes you can tell when someone has had rational language taken away from them, or they've learned to distrust it themselves, their own ability to use that system. They'll edit themselves into silence. And this is a gradual opening back up of communication through symbols and senses and emotional language. So I feel like the reason I have this picture of water being poured into someone's hand is that this is something that should just be infused into our daily lives. It's a special program we're talking about creating, an accessibility program, but it's also just something that we should find ways to pour into every moment of everyday life. That opportunity for meaningfulness, and I want to unpack that a little bit more and explain what I mean by that. Meaningfulness is about three things. The opportunity to express something of the self. It should be pleasurable in some way, and it should also then be connected beyond the self to some sort of something outside your individuality. So the easy way to remember this is me, fun, bigger than me. That's the easiest way to remember it. It's a sense of legacy, a sense of being able to leave yourself beyond your moment. And again, in research, where we are with research right now is that we don't have enough of it. Every single foundation study, the NEA did a working group that they drew together, the National Endowment of the Arts and the National Institutes of Humanities, and particularly complementary and alternative medicines, which I think they've changed the name of now, I can't remember what it is now, to come together about building the research in this area. And every single panel was about, we don't have enough research. The subject numbers are too low. We really can't, we don't have any idea what works. There's not randomized experimental control studies on this. And the pushback from the artists and the social science researchers is, let's look inside the mechanisms, because maybe randomized control research studies aren't what's going to capture the power of what we're talking about here. Let's push back and figure out what kind of research studies are going to actually capture the complexity of why art and creativity works in this situation. So I just have up here from the world of hospice a few of the mechanisms that I think are underneath it. increased expressiveness, increased self-efficacy. In the medical world, they call it symptom management. Increased feeling of contribution, that sense of giving back. Refuge from illness. Improved discussion between family and patients. And decreased discomfort behaviors, which is the nicest way in the dementia world. Sort of the inappropriate way of referring to this is challenging behaviors. And that comes most commonly from toxic environments rather than actual symptoms of the disease itself. So the avenues for doing this work, and I put this slide up here because I think what's happened over the last several generations is that the arts have become distanced from our everyday lives to the point where using the terminology of the medium in which someone is working, so painting, sculpture, poetry, the titles of the medium can be disorienting or alienating to the general population, or particularly older adults who the first thing that they're going to say is, I can't do that. So if you break it down for accessibility, you're making and arranging sounds, you're making and arranging movements, you're making and arranging objects or colors or lines, you're arranging words, even making words in my situation, and again, colors and lines. That is something people think, oh, I can do that. I have access to that. That is something that I can do. So I have this in here for fun, but I'm just going to describe it to you because I don't think we can actually do it with me this far away from you in this room setting. But one of the things I like to do is an exercise. There's two different versions of the exercise. One is to capture and understand sound. So we simply listen to the environment and we say, what sounds do you hear? Actually, we can do that one. If we're just quiet for just like 5 seconds, because silence can be very disorienting to people. We'll just listen for a second and then just tell me what sounds you're hearing. Okay, ready? We'll go in. All right, what sounds did you hear? Any sounds at all?
The HVAC unit.
Breathing? Say it again.
The HVAC unit.
The HVAC unit?
Buzz of the lights.
The buzz of the lights. Can someone make the sound of the buzz of the lights? You guys are awesome. What about the HVAC unit? That's great. Do you hear that? Someone's like, and what was the other one?
Breathing.
Breathing.
I can make that sound.
All right, and what I do commonly when I do this, like when we're in conference room settings, so people will also say, I hear the clinking of glassware in the back room, I hear the buzz of the machinery, and so we'll make all of these sounds and then we'll start playing with them in volume and overlapping them, and I actually have a great blast, like orchestrating them. Okay, now bring up the sound of breathing, down goes the HVAC, up goes the buzz of the lights. It's great fun, and you realize that you're able to create something just out of what you've been hearing and the sounds you're making yourself. And again, that joy of co-creation. So I'm skipping a couple of slides. That example is a quick, brief example of the first of 3 layers of how I see this work happening. The 3 layers are infusion, programming, and community or system layers. The first one is really just everyday moments of infusion. I call them micro moments of imagination, where you're inspired by everyday prompts and it's just a passing moment. I have up here a picture of a window that you might see in your office building or in a care community or anything. And you can imagine in your own cultural institutions that it's any sort of passing moment that you have. And you can use it as a creative prompt for an engagement just in passing. So it's infused. It's not necessarily part of programming. It's just as a micro moment of imagination that you might share with someone. Does anyone have an idea for a question you might ask or something you might do with someone if you passed in front of this window that just shows green trees outside of it? What might you ask or do?
What's it smell like?
What does it smell like? What else can you imagine?
Do you think it's warm outside?
Yeah?
Can you repeat the question?
The question of what might you ask about this image, which is just windows with trees outside?
How many different kinds of trees do you see?
Yeah, what kinds of trees do you see? Or even, if the factual names of trees are not accessible to people, let's name those trees, right? Whatever we want to say they are.
Where do you think the birds live?
Where do you think the birds live? What sounds do you hear? Well, somebody already said that. Sounds do you hear outside? We actually, in another workshop I did, someone said, what do the trees look like? Like, mirroring the image themselves outside of what the trees look like, and then, are they swaying at all? So it's almost like doing a movement mirror. Texture, a discussion of texture. Right? So everyday life can be a prompt in and of itself. The second kind of this work, the second level of it, is the programmatic, which is probably the world that we live in, right? Creating programs, something that's repeatable, something that's put on a schedule. What we saw in the Spark Alliance is all programming, right? So it can be run by volunteers, staff, or artists facilitated, educator facilitated. 1 or 2 sessions might actually complete an entire cycle, so people can drop in. It might just be a one-off deal, scheduled time. So an example of this I have here is my fantastic choreographer, Lenny Cruz, who worked with us on a larger project, but this was one program that we did, where he came out and taught Hawaiian gestural language, and then did storytelling through Hawaiian gestural language. So I'll just teach you a couple of them for fun, and you'll see this in another slide shortly. So what do you suppose this one is? Tree. So my hand is kind of waving like a palm tree would wave. Guess what this one is? Water. You can kind of guess what that like waves. This is actually sand or beach. This one is Mountain. You're very good. This is wind, right? This is crossed arms across your chest and then folding out toward you is I love you, right? This is hands kind of folding over. Can you see me behind the podium? Here you go. In a circle, hands going over each other right around your belly is my soul or my spirit. This is my home. He's doing that right now. Home, like a roof over your head. He taught them about 40 different gestural language, and then he had them tell stories themselves based on that. So the third layer of this is the community or system layer. And this is where I have now become obsessed with working. The sessions where we do stories are super fun. The program level and the infusion into day-to-day, which I do sort of every day of my life with my kids, it's how I think and act in my everyday life. But working at the system level is so powerful, and I think where we have a lot of work can be done. These involve joining together the programming and the infusion into everyday life into a longer-term project that you can use that meaning-making opportunity to draw in family members, to draw in staff, to draw in volunteers, if you're in a congregate setting, to draw in residents from all levels of care. If you're working in multiple systems together, I'll shortly tell you about a project I did with Meals on Wheels, collaborating with Home Visits and Telephone Reassurance Program, multiple systems collaborating simultaneously in order to do a longer-term project that then part of the infusion of improvisation and creativity is into the system itself so that it becomes more flexible and more creative. That is magic stuff, let me just tell you. I'll give you some examples of that shortly because I know it can be a little bit hard to grasp. It also allows you to build partnerships for broader impact where you might not have thought about that before. And if we really had about a 3-hour session here, we could break into small groups from all your different organizations and figure out how all of us in this room could do a project together. And I'll throw out an idea for you of one I'm working on that you can all just take and run with as well. So the system level, I want to give you an example of it. So the example I gave of working with Lenny Cruz in the Hawaiian gestural language, that was part of what was called the Penelope Project. And I know Carrie actually got up to see the play that was a culminating event of that 2011, so quite a while ago now already. We took Homer's Odyssey and over the course of 2 years explored it with everyone who lived, worked, and visited Luther Manor, which is a continuing care community, independent living, assisted living, skilled nursing, and an adult day program. It's a little village in and of itself. It's 700 people live there or participate in programming there, and 700 people work there at various times on different shifts. So it is a little village in and of itself. So together we took apart Homer's Odyssey, we switched it from the perspective of Odysseus, who's the one who gets all the grand adventures, to Penelope, the heroine who never left home, and really exploring the strength and power of her position and what she did to create home and welcome Odysseus back home. It was everything from poetry to, in the individual programming sessions, choreography with Lenny, poetry workshops, hero writing, stories of heroes, role-playing between Odysseus and Penelope for when they finally meet each other again, letter writing, imagined letter writing, and then when we asked, how would the letters get back and forth? They said by bird. So we turned the letters into origami birds that we then created into a big display. They had so much output from all that creative programming that they created a room in independent living called Penelope's Room that became a living gallery where all of the stuff, you would go visit it. It had hours and a docent. And someone from building maintenance painted a beautiful sunburst cloud on the ceiling and then a Greek landscape on the side of the walls. It just became a completely transformative experience. And in the world of the arts, what we did essentially was take the everyday life of Luther Manor, the way medication is delivered, the meals are delivered, the laundry, the visiting, even when people pass away and leave the facility or how they come into the facility. And we put the art making in the world of Penelope on top of it, and then we raised it up a little bit to become a place of possibility and meaning making. So everything, you never knew when you were in there, is this Luther Manor or is this Ithaca in ancient Greece in the world of Penelope and Odysseus? It really became quite magical. The culminating event was a play, and the culminating scene of that play was a chorus in which anyone who wanted to at that time on that day could come down and play Penelope on the stage. It was all call and response, which was completely accessible to people with memory loss. That was our goal, that all of the programming could be accessible so that we were normalizing and integrating people with memory loss and cognitive disabilities, trying to reduce that gulag of disability that separated them from everyone else in the community. I have a little video. It's a short one. This is part of a longer, hour-long documentary that if you're interested in seeing it, you can look it up. It's called Penelope, the Documentary. Go figure. So here's just a little excerpt.
Is it okay if I put you over there? I'll get up and turn you around. Is it a lock on? Oh, there we go. Darn, you didn't tell me your lock was on. We're gonna go for a roller coaster ride. That's all right. You know, the story's all about Penelope. We're looking for Penelope. We go all through the building to find her. And when we finally find her at the end, there's not one Penelope, there's 100. So that's what we find on the other end, that actually we've been looking for Penelope But there's a Penelope story in everyone. That everyone is weighted, everyone has love, everyone has a story of being a hero in your own life.
My eyes, they sparkle like stars. Stars. I'm calling you. I'm calling you.
I am seeing you. Your eyes, my beloved, sparkle like the stars. You are the ones that make this place home.
And God will grant us a happier old age. A happier old age. We'll be free from our trials at last. We'll be free from our trials at last.
If the God will grant us a happier old age, we'll be free from our trials at last.
And those really are the last words of the Penelope story in the Fagles translation. Make sure you get the Fagles translation. So this goes to the building of what I call a creative community of care. And I think you can do that on a micro level where you're building it with, if you're working in a congregate care setting, you're building a creative community of care that integrates all the residents and the staff and the volunteers and the family members. I have students over here because I'm also a professor, and I have service learning integrated into a lot of my courses, my storytelling courses, my performing community courses, where we're teaching students how to do this work. So they're being sent out into the community regularly to be part of this kind of an effort. And you can also do this systems-wide. So again, you and your organization could collaborate with another community organization to do a program, or within your own institution, collaborate with volunteers, family members, people coming in, and staff as well. So here's an example of that system level. This is a project that we did a couple of years ago now, and it is in its second phase, which is, I get breathless when I think about the second phase now already. For a year, we did a project called The Islands of Milwaukee. The goal was to reach, and Chicago is facing the same thing Milwaukee is, actually all urban centers and even rural is a big issue, that older adults are more than ever before living alone. And in Chicago, it became very clear and very problematic during the heat wave, as you might well remember, that we suddenly realized we don't have systems or adequate systems to reach out to older adults in need who are living alone. And we wanted to figure out how could we bring creative community engagement to people living alone, or what we called underconnected to community. Sometimes people are living with someone, but that someone might not only not be a support network, but might be sort of a deleterious effect on that person's socialization as well. Might be further isolating them from the rest of their community. So I collaborated as co-lead artist with Marie Towie from Sojourn Theater, and we studied the systems that are in place to reach older adults living alone or underconnected. One of those was the now called Meals on Wheels. Ours was called the Home Delivered Meal System. They send out, through Goodwill Industries of Southeast Wisconsin, 2,000 meals a day through a network of drivers who, ours are actually paid. A lot of those systems are volunteer drivers. Sometimes those drivers are the only people those folks see all day long. And they have about a 30-second to a minute window at the door, less in the winter time as it gets colder. So you have to be careful about what time of year you're actually starting the program. You have to start it when it's warm and then move toward the cold so that you already have a relationship set up. We also worked with a telephone reassurance program. Do we have that in the Chicago area, do you know? Ours is run by interfaith older adult programs where they train volunteers, some of whom are actually folks who live alone and are underconnected themselves, to call another person just to make sure they're okay that day. So that was a system that we worked with. We worked with a home care system. So it was we were training the actual caregivers themselves. And we had these questions of the day. We had about 45 of those questions of the day, poetically worded, along the theme of islands, nautical, vaguely nautical kind of references. Some of them were in a series where what is the most common path in your home? What is a common path outside your home? And what blocks your path? Those were a series of 3 that we put together, just sort of getting people to jump the track of the way that they think and to look at their environment a little bit differently and to also look at their own strengths a little bit differently. So it was, again, strength-based. The one you see here is, again, strength-based. What is something you could teach another person? They had an option for different ways to get back to us. They could call a phone number on the back, or they could handwrite on the card. And what you see here is a handwritten card. These were my favorite. We got 3,000 of these cards back. And you could tell the care and the energy and focus that they took just from their handwriting, the urgency of the connection that they felt. To care for the elderly, not to gossip, to give your troubles to Jesus. That's what she could teach someone else. We took the audio from these and we created listening stations on an art installation that we put in City Hall, because that's another component, is that we're trying to revision folks from objects of care, people who are receiving care services in the community, toward active citizens who are underrepresented voices that we're amplifying to the city. And on this slide, you just see the islands that we created with some of the listening stations. And here, I won't play it for you, but we would follow up people who would call and leave voicemails with their name and number, and we would offer them a artistic house call. And so some of these relationships we deepened with folks. This gives you an idea of the interactive question exhibit with the islands below. This one was, what is your safe harbor? In my home, in my easy chair, with a good book and a scotch. I'm not going to have time to go over this one, but this one came out of observing on the Meals on Wheels delivery that there were oftentimes restaurants and grocery stores across the street from where we were delivering, but the streets were so impassable that people had given up trying to cross. So instead, we've created cities that are impassable for older adults and people with disabilities. And so instead, we've had to create an entire elaborate system of meal delivery. And we thought, what if we empowered the pedestrians again and tried to teach the drivers to see and stop, and that people are worth stopping for? So this is The Crossings, which is an entire project that we did based on that. Whoops. It was a very funny performance. You got to use humor, and it was inviting all the civic officials to come in as well, so that they crossed with people with disabilities and older adults and experienced what they experienced by crossing the street and not being able to make it in time. And the next week, the lights were extended in 2 of the intersections that we worked at. Immediate policy change. That's the kind of thing I like. So my last slide here is just to say that this level of systems change and long-term project development is what is the subject of our Summer Institute for Time Slips that we hold up in beautiful Milwaukee at the other end of the training. And just to take a peek at it, if you're interested in that, that would be where you could learn more about that approach. So I would just say thank you, and we can turn to questions.
I told you she's great, and I hope you all enjoyed her wonderful talk, but now we have a lot of time for you guys to ask Anne questions, and we do have someone who has a microphone, so we ask that you wait. Yolanda down there has a microphone, so please ask your questions into the microphone. Thank you.
I guess I have 2 questions. I really enjoyed your presentation. Can you talk a little bit about other collaborators and allies outside of Time Slips, who've been your partners outside of traditional care communities, other non-traditional partners? And then what are the artistic house calls?
what are artistic house calls? So the partnership question, and I'll try to parse the question and re-guide me if I'm not answering it in the right way. So Time Slips is really an umbrella organization that partnering with universities. So right now we offer service learning in the intro to creative storytelling. So students can do that through volunteerism or service learning, and they're coordinated then to go out. University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee does this. There's about a dozen campuses across the country that then go out to a whole series of care communities, and then they offer that, and then offer the storytelling. And then oftentimes an arts organization will gather the stories and then present the stories back to the community in some way. So that's a real simple example of partnership. That would be care communities, university service learning, or high school. This fabulous thing in Chicago where service learning is required for high school students. You have that mechanism as well. So that's a kind of a simple example. We get very complex in our collaborations. So the Crossings project was a collaboration with 3 different municipalities and their police departments and their city engineering. It was also on the theater season at my university in the theater department. So I had Sojourn Theater as professional performers, my students that we cast as developmental and professional performers in the making. We collaborated with South Shore Senior Connecting Caring Communities, which is a senior advocacy organization that had picked pedestrian safety as their issue for the year. And we said, how can we amplify your efforts? And they said, we can't get our alderman to pay attention to us because he says to us, do you want us to stop the bad guys or do you want us to help you walk across the street? I think it's a false choice, right? I think it's a false, we could do both. So I said, I think we can get your alderman to pay attention. And in fact, the alderman, in the one I'm speaking of, came crossed with us and then collaborated with the police after the performance day to put up digital speed signs and then do kind of a sting warning operation. They gave some tickets to really egregious people who did not stop and who were speeding through those intersections, but mostly just, did you know that the police would stop and give warnings? So that was a really, again, a collaboration. The mayors of all 3 municipalities crossed with us, as did the Dean of Public Health, which was pretty incredible. The Milwaukee County Department on Aging, which is our AAA area agency on aging, had people and their commission on aging, they had commissioners at each of the 3 crossings as well. So some of these partnerships get ginormous, and you have to, we do partnership agreements with everyone so that the expectations and the commitments are super clear. That's the subject, really partnership is the subject, probably the most illuminating subject of the Summer Institute, because we talk about what does it mean to be in partnership? What are you asking people to do? How do you articulate success? All those different things. So, other question was artistic house calls. So what would happen in that grant project? So the second phase of the Islands of Milwaukee is, I'll tell you about in a minute, but Artistic House Calls for the Islands of Milwaukee, which was a well-supported grant project, probably $200,000 of grant support around the entire system of partnership for this project. What we did when I had a graduate student who was an MSW, who, when the voicemails came through Google Voice, which I love Google Voice, they're sort of pretending it doesn't exist anymore, but it's still there and we should all use it. The graduate student, Sarah Frymouth, would call them back and say, thank you so much for your answer. I loved it. Have you answered other questions? Would you like me to ask you other questions? Have you ever thought, would you ever want an artistic house call for an artist to come either to you or we could meet you somewhere? And some of them wanted artistic house calls only by the phone. And so one of the Sojourn artists from Colorado actually called Ernst, who I think had a little hoarding issue. So he didn't want anybody in his home, but they would tell stories and learn to shape stories over the phone. So they would pick some sort of artistic expression, arranging words, arranging sounds, arranging objects or color, things like that, with an artist that would help facilitate that. I went out and worked with a gentleman named Bill, who had a very, very difficult time. For him, I won't tell you, I mean, I'm only using his first name, but he had a difficult time speaking, but he had an incredible capacity for singing. So he would tell me stories, what blocks your path was the question I asked him, and he told me about rocks on the farm that he used to have up in Charlevoix, Michigan. And we talked about rocks and why he loved them, and that they don't talk back, and that they accept him for who he is, and that when he touches the rocks, he feels connected to farmers from centuries ago. And I said, is there a song about rocks? And he said, Rock of Ages. I said, let's rewrite that. And so we rewrote the lyrics, and then we sang it, and it was gorgeous. And the slide that you saw up there of James and then a volunteer woman was of them singing the revision of Rock of Ages over the voice that you could hear in the background of Bill singing as well. He wasn't able to come to the performance, but his voice was there, so it was quite beautiful. So that's a bit of an artistic house call. There were about a dozen of those that we did in the course of that project. The second phase, and the goal of the Islands of Milwaukee in all of our granting, was to create a sustainable system to bring creative engagement to older adults living alone or underconnected to community. So it actually wasn't to move the needle on isolation or any of those things. It was to create a sustainable system that we could go back to and expand. And I got an idea for a new round of questions, which is based on Peter Pan. It's called I Won't Grow Up. And it is really all about the meaning and value of childhood at any age. And I called the collaborators, Meals on Wheels, Interfaith Older Adult Programs, Milwaukee County Department on Aging, and I said, here's my new idea. Do you guys want to get together? Yes. Love the idea, love the sample questions. We sat down, it was a half-an-hour meeting. They said, send us the questions. Each month we'll print them on the back of the menus that go out to 2,000 people in the Meals on Wheels system. Well, phone number, they gave the trick is the way the information goes out, the way it comes back, the way we build on it, and the way we sort of give proof of listening, which is they were part of something bigger. How do we get the built-on art making back to them? And so we have it all done in a half-an-hour meeting. That is a sustainable system, and I was really proud of that. So the question that you can take home with you for this is, oh, my backpack's over there, but so I can't remember the phone number, but is this month's question is, what are the foods and tastes of childhood? And if you have an answer, oh, actually, you can go. Thank you, my prompt lady. So here are some of the answers that have come in by the voicemail. On my birthday, we always had watermelon, and everyone in the neighborhood would get a slice. And of course, hot dogs. That's from Lucy, who's not, I asked them to leave their first name and their age. Anything chocolate and spaghetti sauce. My mom's meatballs. Oh, I miss that. Man, do I miss that. Chicken legs, mashed potatoes, and peanut butter bars. Milk, comma, chocolate, and cheese. We are in Milwaukee. Bubblegum, peanut butter, licorice, chocolate milk, pencil erasers, paste, cherry suckers, Jell-O, and corn on the cob. Hot dogs roasted on a stick over a campfire on a beach, even when lightly seasoned with sand, washed down with cream soda or A&W root beer. And I started this little one-pager here, and I've gotten about 15 more responses, so I have to expand it. But you can email a response to info@timeslips.org, or the Islands line was our voicemail line, 414-678-1653. So there you have it. The next question for next month is, what are the sounds of childhood? And the first question was, what are the characteristics of childhood? And so we're reaching out to Arts Eco as a program for teaching arts educators how to incorporate social justice into their art classroom. And so we're giving this to them, and we're also giving it to the Aging Services Network, and we're co-introducing it to each other. So that It's the meaning and value of childhood at any age. Now I've just washed you over with more information. Yes, there's a question down here.
I have a really simple question.
Yeah.
I want to applaud you for spending all of this.
Hang on.
I want to applaud you for spending all of this time and not using the word senior once. And I know you use older adults. This is a thing with me, but you use older adults a lot.
I use elders.
You use elders. I saw you use elders.
I use older adults.
What are you the most satisfied with?
I listen to what other people are using in the room, and then I use that. Because all the language is bad.
Yeah.
Because people associate different things with different words, and so it's really context specific, and you use whatever language is defined in the context you're in, I think. Yeah. Down here? Yeah. She's coming, she's coming.
I am not a plant, but I know you're having a conference this summer. When I found out you were coming, I looked you up. There's a conference in Milwaukee, and I'm wondering what you will be covering there that you haven't covered today, or what all is involved in the conference.
So that's this slide, the Create Change Summer Institute, which is the 2016 Summer Institute. It's the third time we've done it, so we figured out how to do it really well by now. It's 2.5 days. It's drawing together usually about 40 people. We try to not make it too much bigger than that. The past 2 times we've offered it, they come from all over the world now. We have had people from China and Australia and lots of Canadians come for it. Lots of different states, people from different states. And they're coming from a lot of different organizations. They're coming as teaching artists or artists who want to expand their capacity in this field, and also from aging services in some sort of either congregate care settings or community-based care settings. Some of the programs that I was talking about. And what we're doing is sort of co-learning how to build these systems change and these longer-term projects like Island Milwaukee or the Crossings or the Penelope Project. So inside of that, how we get to that is that we look at partnership. We have 5 different arts-making workshops that are co-taught. It's co-creation with Osher Institute for Lifelong Learning. So you're working with older adults. The teaching artists and the aging services providers are on equal footing with older adults as we're art making in different types of art making. Storytelling, visual arts, movement. This year we have Stage Right Theater, which is, it's very moving for me because it's a former student of mine who's a musical theater major who came up with a 3-workshop series that's inspired by the time slips process. In the first, you write a story. In the second, you set it to music and movement. In the third, you rehearse and perform an original musical. It's pretty incredible, and she does it with people in middle to late stage, various forms of dementia. There might be people from the Alzheimer's Association. I really don't like to use the word anymore. Dementia is such a complex series of symptoms that I just use dementia now at this point. So we learn how to co-create, we learn how to plan, evaluate, and document and partner to build a long-term project. And then we learn how to pitch and design our own. And so the last morning is pitching these projects in groups that you're working together, and then the rest of the room giving you feedback on those project designs. And then we spend a lot of time over the next year checking in with each other to see if anyone did the projects or how they adapted them. It's a supportive, inspiring environment. So thank you, not being a plant, but doing a great job anyway.
You too.
Any other questions? I tend to overwhelm people with information. Yeah.
I have a question. This is about cultural difference. I'm Latina, and I'm actually very aware that to unlock the imagination, the earliest memories are often in a different language.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could speak to the barrier of non-English speakers and the movement to unlock the imagination of that growing and really significant population.
That's a great question. For people who don't know dementia very well, that is something that happens is that there's a language retreat, so that even if someone speaks 5 languages, through the process in the later symptoms, you'll end up in the original language, which if you're living in the country of a later language can be challenging. So the time slips process itself, which is all about echoing emphatic communication, which is not just echoing the word, but the emotional intent behind the expression itself and the full body communication. So the facilitator is really learning a new language, in essence, and echoing back. So, and because we tend to use visual prompts or a question prompt, or say a music prompt or an object prompt, the people in a different language than I speak, say, can still respond, and then I am echoing whatever they're telling me and writing it down, repeating it as best I can. So I've done a session in a group of a blended group at a senior center in New Jersey with older adults who spoke Russian and older adults with cognitive disabilities combined. And I'll tell you what, that was fascinating. It was a learning experience for me, but I think also sort of a building experience for that group. You're essentially community building and weaving people together across language difference and ability difference, cognitive differences. So that was very empowering. We do have groups in Milwaukee in particular, and we just finished a video of a time slip session in Spanish, which all of the sessions at the United Community Center, which is a Spanish-speaking geriatric adult day program, incorporate tons of movement and music, which also can speak across language as well. So that's just a small way to answer that question.
And it's like food difference and music difference and all that can be different stimulus, yeah?
Yep, different prompts. Other questions that you might have? I'm hopeful that of all of the examples and of the categorizations of things, that the thing that you take away is that cultural institutions not only have a role that is pretty, it can take some time to figure out how to expand and open yourself to these types of programs, but you can lead. Age-Friendly Chicago 2012, you're not on the list. And the cultural institutions can be this fabric of social participation and a network of social support that can really, I think, pick up people you've been serving your entire life of your organization, that you don't know you're not serving them. You don't know that they're falling away. You can pick them up and bring them back into the fold and show them that your organization still can be a support network in a place that they can love and enjoy all the way through the end. It's an exciting time, I think, for that. And now the examples are all over the world. I just got a one-pager description of a day-long conference of museums in Florence, Italy, that is all about how can the museums here in Florence, which are considerable, be part of an age-friendly and supportive society for our residents. This is an exciting time for you to be relevant in your communities. There's more questions. Yeah.
Now, along those same lines, I often personally think of accessibility as making whatever performance or presentation accessible to people in the community I'd like to serve. That's not quite the same thing as we're talking about here. We're not bringing them into the presentation we've got going. We're co-creating. Is there a way, or what has been a success at doing it in a more straightforward way to bring those folks into the presentation you've already got going?
So there's a great example out of Cleveland, I can't remember, Cleveland Museum of Art, Cleveland Art Museum, Cleveland, I think it's CMA, has a remote classroom that pipes into care communities, and it's beloved. International Puppetry Center in Atlanta, International Center for Puppetry, see it's all jumbling around in my head.
They have an incredible remote classroom that they have built for kids, but they're starting to realize lifelong learning. We can use this to engage older adults all across a range of abilities as well. So that is bringing their existing programming and opening it up to the community and in that kind of a way. I think bringing people to your building, one of the things is MoMA does it on a closed day to provide a special environment. Small museums or cultural institutions might not necessarily be able to do that, but you can sort of create a quiet environment where it feels special, like special time, and people can hear and focus. That's another way. I'm trying to think of some other examples. Symphonies are starting to do this. And again, they're doing it with special programming set aside. Phoenix and the Banner Health System there are collaborating on creating a series of events for families with memory loss to attend that, again, have a special group so that they can meet and have a support group. One of the most exciting things, I think, are memory cafes. Have people heard of memory cafes and the structure of memory cafes? It's a virgin audience for memory cafes. Look at that. Memory cafes are sort of almost the next evolution of the senior center, to use the bad S word, right? It's a supportive environment where families dealing with memory loss can gather. They're hosting them in third spaces or cultural institutions. So Botanic Garden might be a host of a memory cafe, which is once a month people with memory loss can gather, families can gather there for programming. Ours in my village of Shorewood meets in a bar. I think this is Wisconsin. There's one that meets at the Milwaukee Public Museum. There's one that meets at the Waukesha Library. It's really it's getting so deep into the grassroots that you're figuring out where people in the neighborhood want to gather and how can you collaborate with that kind of grassroots organization to be supportive of it. And even the ones that gather at the Three Lions Pub, they'll, one month they'll go and they'll meet at the art museum. Or, so it's that kind of level of collaboration and partnership that you can get to of bringing people in. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
What do you do at the Memory Cafe?
What do you do at a memory cafe was the question. There's a range of things. Probably the most important is a feeling of support and getting to know people. As I said, the experience of memory loss and dementia can be one of social isolation and the pinching off of social network because people become awkward or uncomfortable talking to you for some reason. We have a discomfort of, we let it stop us from being a supportive friend. We don't know how to move past it to be a supportive friend. So the real benefit of the memory cafes are bringing people together to form social network and co-support. Sometimes, I'm not a big fan of the brain games. I think they make you better at playing brain games. So I think walking and exercise and an appreciation of the natural world, social support and social connection, and then an opportunity for creative expression and engagement in some way. That's what commonly is the content of the memory cafes. Has anyone heard of Gary Glasner's work in the Alzheimer's Poetry Project? A couple folks. His approach is often used, time slips is commonly used, the storytelling techniques and the improvisational networking system is used inside of them. And so I hope that answers that question. For an example of a really well thought out memory cafe system, the Fox Valley Memory Project is a collaboration in a community in kind of eastern central Wisconsin, Appleton, Neenah, Menasha, Fond du Lac area, and they have a whole system of memory cafes that meet, I think there's 12 of them now that are meeting all over at different cultural institutions, some at restaurants, some at bars, And they're also collaborating on a dementia-friendly community project as well. Any other burning questions? Otherwise, I can linger for a little bit as well. I know you have important things to go do. All right. You guys, thank you for your attention and for your interest in the topic.
Fade to black. White text on black background. Creative engagement in an aging society. Presented by Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. For workshop resources and more information, visit chicagoculturalaccess.org. Presenting speaker, Ann Basting, PhD, the founder and director of Timeslips Creative Storytelling. Workshop accessibility, Kathy Raycan, real-time captioning. Video editing, captioning, and audio description by BridgetMelton.com. Video fades to black.